This is my favorite jacket, but I was afraid if I started with this jacket that y'all wouldn't come back. So it's always good to let the audience get to know the speaker a little bit before you break out all the crazy. But we're here at the end, so I figured it's safe. I want to revisit briefly the three keys that I had talked about last week. I talked about two of them last week, at least, right? So for me, for trying to understand the Second Great Awakening and the revivals that broke out, am I moving too much? It's my jacket. It's my jacket is creating feedback with it's too loud. Yeah. Okay. All right.
This is very sensitive. This is sensitive.
It's very sensitive. If I stand perfectly still, no, that doesn't work either. It's my breathing. Quit breathing. That's no problem. If I talk enough, there won't be any breathing. Okay. So, with understanding things, the first key for me is volunteerism, right? Because there's no state church, no one can be forced to come to the church, right? They have to volunteer to come. And so that means you want your church to be appealing. Sometimes that means visually, right? And so you have beautiful stained glass, you have organs for music. Sometimes that means changing the theology a little bit, right? That very kind of harsh message of predestination, where there is nothing you can do to be saved, is not an attractive message in the growing United States, right? A country that just threw off the shackles of colonialism in Great Britain and independence. Seemed like there was nothing that the country couldn't do. The future is wide open to tell people, God decided before the creation of the world which people are going to heaven and which people are going to hell. That's not an encouraging message. But if grace is available to all, and all you have to do is accept it, that is a very different kind of message. Right? So volunteerism, people have to volunteer to come. Second, pluralism. There is so much growing diversity among Christians in the U.S. So many different options and things that people can choose. The standard ones of Presbyterianism and Anglicanism quickly, they're already overshadowed by the time of the American Revolution. And that diversity just continues to grow in the Second Great Awakening. And remember that most of these groups were not friendly towards each other, right? As I said last week, if you were Presbyterian, you were Presbyterian because you thought that was right, and everyone else is going to hell, right? So you don't look at other denominations and think, well, we're all fellow Christians on this journey. No, you looked at them as slightly misguided, probably or definitely going down. So, okay, so keep those in mind. The third one that I didn't really talk about is, and the reason is because it's the focus of this entire lecture, is activism. It was not enough just to go to church and to sit in the pew. Your conversion experience compelled you to do something to make this world a better place. And theologically, I had talked a little bit about post-millennialism, right? The question of when Christ is going to return, and about this reign of Christ on earth. Is it a literal 1,000-year reign, or is it this more kind of metaphorical time of growing peace? The post-millennialists are very optimistic about human nature in many ways, right? That we can improve the world. We can save the world through our actions. We can make it better. And so many, same way, that is an appealing message to Americans in the early 1800s. The growing nation, like they think that's a very kind of pop. We can make things better. We can create a perfect world thanks to the Spirit working within us. Let's get to it. Right? Why should we want to delay? Let's get ready for the return of Christ. So let's perfect the world. And so that's what this activism is all about. ways to try to get organized and make the world a better place. And there is just an explosion of reform movements and groups in the early 1800s. It's not just happening here, it's also happening in England. But almost every kind of problem that you could come up with, there was a group organized to try to make it better. So, clothing. This is still the age of corsets for women. There's a move for clothing reform, for education reform. There's no public school system yet. In the early 1800s, schools are not free and available to all, and it's not even consistent with the education. Any of you familiar with the McGuffey readers? You know that name? McGuffey was a Presbyterian minister who decided that there needed to be a standard curriculum to teach children how to read. So the McGuffey reader was created for that. Sunday school. We are here in a Sunday school class. That's a product of the Second Great Awakening, partially because of the lack of educational opportunities. So we'll bring people to the church, especially kids, teach them to read if they don't know how to read already. Right? It was a literal school. Eventually there'd be a standardized curriculum so that the uniform lesson plan, so that no matter what church you went to, even across denominations, there would be the same Bible passage studied every day, every Sunday for the Sunday school class. There's American Bible Societies to create free Bibles to allow people the opportunity to read. Right? Books are expensive, and what better book to read than the Bible? Right? It's kind of one that everyone could agree on. So you've got the American Bible Society created to give people copies of the Bible to be able to read it on their own at home. There's the American Tract Society that was created. These are still a thing, right? Churches that publish the little religious tracts. You find them in bathrooms and UT games and things like that. And little, do you know where you're going when you die? That kind of stuff. This was created in the 1800s as part of the Second Great Awakening, this idea to pass them out, send them out through the mail, put them in public places for people to see. Just millions of pages printed of these tracts. In 1830, there was about 5 pages of tracts printed for every person in the United States. There was a lot of effort going into this kind of activity. Right? But there's also prison reforms, reforms for what the language they used at the time, right, for the insane. Because usually people with mental issues were just sent to prison with the normal criminals. Well, it's the product of the Second Great Awakening that people, well, wait a minute, these aren't criminals. They're facing different kinds of problems. They shouldn't be incarcerated and punished. Let's put them in an insane asylum. Maybe that's just slightly better, but at least it's a little bit better. It's recognizing that they're not criminals. There's other things going on there. My favorite, though, is probably the temperance movement. Right? And so this gets started. It's hard for us to believe just how much alcohol was consumed in the United States on a regular basis. So to throw some numbers at you again, in 1830, every American over the age of 13 consumed, I'm make sure I get it right, 30 gallons of beer, wine, or cider a year, which averages out to 2.5 gallons a month, and 9 gallons of hard liquor a year, which is 3/4 of a gallon a month. Every person over the age of 13, right? So now how do they come up with that number? They have a general number for the population, right? Because they know from the times of the census how many people are 13 or older, but they also know how much alcohol was produced and taxed. They take those numbers and divide, and that's where this comes from. Now here's the thing to think about, though. I'm just trying to think about trying to consume 2.5 gallons of beer a month. Just me. I mean, that's a lot. Almost a gallon of hard liquor. that's only the legal alcohol. Right? Those of us here, we know there's places in the mountains where there's stills and there's secret alcohol, the hard alcohol that's also being produced. Like there's no way to estimate how much of that is going on. So this number is just based on what people can figure out from tax records was being consumed. In other words, if you were over 13, you probably spent most of your day slightly inebriated. And that was just the way of life. Drinking was a part of working class culture because there's not a lot of entertainment options to the working class, but alcohol is cheap. Right? So you can have a hard day's work, go to a saloon, go to a pub, relax, rinse and repeat the next day. Alcohol is also a part of upper class culture because what else do you have to spend your money on other than art and good food and drink? Right? But it's the middle class. And a middle class in a growing, industrializing nation. Right? I think it's no accident that at the same time that we start to get more factories, steam engines powering things, being slightly inebriated around a spinner that's steam powered in a factory is dangerous. It's already dangerous to work in a factory and to go have your liquid lunch, which was very common. Beer was considered food in the 1800s. The caloric and vitamins and minerals in beer was equivalent to eating half a loaf of bread. So it makes sense from a financial standpoint and even like a nutrition standpoint to just go have a couple beers on your lunch break and then go back to work. That was incredibly common. That's just what people did. That's dangerous. Right? It also doesn't quite seem to fit with this notion of Christian perfection. Right? So there's a growing emphasis on temperance, on leaving these things aside, but how do you get the working class to give up their alcohol? Right? What does it take to convince people that they need to drink less? This becomes the biggest challenge then, right? So one of the ways that you sell temperance to the working class is the idea of respectability. You want higher pay. You want to be treated with a level of respect or like you're an equal to the owners, to the lawyers in town. One way to prove your respectability was to sign a temperance card then and take the pledge that you will voluntarily give up alcohol. So it was a way to move into a higher level of society by choosing to change your behavior. It's one way then that these middle class values of temperance become so dominant in the United States. You convince the other groups to gain respectability by acting like we're acting in the middle class. So that becomes a thing. You try all different kinds of strategies like morality tales. I love this cartoon that I be maybe a little hard to see. The progress of the drunkard. Starts off just socially drinking with friends, right? But each step up the ladder, up the little archway, gets worse and worse until death by suicide.
Oh, yeah.
It's a horrible morality tale. But, right, it seems inevitable. It starts off great. But one thing leads to another. It's an attempt to make a persuasive appeal, right? An emotional appeal. People. This is what's going to happen. Oh, it looks great now. You're just hanging out drinking with friends. But this is where it ends up. Right? So they make these kinds of emotional appeals. They use all those tracts, right? Millions of pages being produced, a lot of them with these kinds of themes to try and get social change. They also worked with the government, right? There's petitions with any of these groups, right? We take so much for granted, or I mean, in many ways, we do exactly what they created. You identify a problem. Then what do? You form a group, right? You form an organization that's targeted towards that problem. You solicit funds, get people to join as members. You start drives, petition drives to get signatures, to present to local officials, to try to get things changed. If you can target a particular business that's part of the problem, you boycott the business. Right? All of the things that we do to try to work on change now, that's what they're doing here in the 1800s. That's what they created, is this system they figure out. It's just, okay, this is going to be temperance. We're going to work on reducing alcohol so that people aren't walking around drunk all the time. Let's lower those numbers. Oh, we're going to fix the schools. So we're going to form a group, collect donations, get members, start petitions. So they do a lot of work with petitions. Maine is the first state to pass a ban on the selling of alcoholic beverages in the 1850s. 12 additional states followed suit then with that. Why was alcohol not sold on Sundays for so long? Y'all remember when it suddenly became legal? I remember being in college, not trying to buy beer at that time, but being in, and nothing good ever happens late, but being in a food city on a Saturday when it became Sunday. And there was a guy who walked over. I was trying to figure out something else, non-alcoholic, but he put up the police tape to block off, because it was now Sunday, and you can't buy alcohol on Sunday. And so he put the tape up, just as a reminder to people, you can't buy it. That's a Second Great Awakening thing. Right? If you couldn't get a state to pass a total ban on alcohol, you could convince them not to sell alcohol on Sunday. That's the Lord's Day. You shouldn't be drinking or selling alcohol on the Lord's Day. So many states passed blue laws then. That's a whole part of Sabbath laws and regulations, right? Not just alcohol, but a whole lot of other things. Trying to close restaurants, close other businesses, all kinds of things that aren't supposed to go on the Sabbath. Right, so that's all flows out of this, and some of those laws are still with us. Or at least until a few years ago. Some of those things. I actually meant to email you to see. Maybe someone knows. When did Church Street stop using wine in communion? Anyone know? I mean, it's not in the lifetime of anyone here, I would guess.
Prohibition.
This is Dr. Welch. Yes, of Welch's grape juice. A total ban on alcohol is a problem for churches. You're not supposed to make alcohol. What do you do about communion? Because the fermentation of grape juice is a natural thing. Right? If you just leave grape juice alone, it's going to ferment. Now you can make it taste better by guiding that process along in certain ways, but it's going to become alcoholic on its own. Until this guy, this jerk, figured out how to stop the fermentation process. and produce non-alcoholic wine that was targeted specifically towards churches to solve this problem. Now he does that a couple years after the Civil War. He's working on that. He is a Wesleyan Holiness Methodist. So not a part of like the Methodist Episcopal Church, the big group, but one of the smaller Methodist groups in the United States that are total abstainers from alcohol. So this became his life's work, like to solve that problem for churches. We'll create non-alcoholic wine so that churches can safely celebrate communion and not have to break any kind of temperance codes. So there's work on all of this. Abolitionism, the ending of slavery in the United States. Not necessarily the gradual ending of slavery. Abolitionism was about the immediate ending of slavery. Many northern states had already kind of phased out the institution of slavery. At the time of the American Revolution, there were slaves in every colony and state. Not every state depended upon slave labor as a main part of their economy, but there were slaves everywhere. But kind of after the Revolution, there were many that took the words of Thomas Jefferson that all men are created equal. How does that fit with the institution of slavery? There are different answers to that question. But so the institution of slavery started to get phased out in places in the north. There were places in the south that it was getting phased out until the invention of the cotton gin. The invention of the cotton gin allowed a different kind of cotton to be harvested. There was long stem and short stem, and the gin was able to harvest short stem, which could grow away from the coasts, which opened up massive amounts of territory then to cotton cultivation. You get the cotton belt, and the explosion then of slavery throughout. Thomas Jefferson is famous for many things, but he talked about the institution of slavery being like a wolf that we are holding by the ears. It can't hurt us because we're holding its ears. We don't like it. It's scary. It's bad. But if we let go, it's going to kill us. His point was he didn't like slavery, but he didn't know how to get rid of it. He certainly didn't do much during his life to try to get rid of it and own slaves his entire life. Owned lots of slaves his entire life. Right? So there's lots of people that would be interested in ending slavery in some way if they could figure out exactly how to do it. So there's also lots of plans. Right? The American Colonization Society was founded in the early 1820s. The idea was convince slave owners to free their slaves, but then the slaves would be sent back to Africa. So they didn't like the institution of slavery, but not liking slavery did not necessarily mean they were interested in full equality for black people. They didn't want them here, let's send them back where they came from. So a colony was created, what becomes the country of Liberia. The capital of Liberia is Monroeville, named after President James Monroe, the first president of the American Colonization Society. When he was done being president of the United States, he became president of the American Colonization Society. Abolitionists, mostly, were not interested in colonization. Because colonization implied slow, gradual emancipation. We pay enslavers to free their slaves, so there's compensation. Then we send the slaves back. Abolitionists were like, slavery is a sin. It's a moral stain on the nation. It's bad for everybody. It's bad for the slaves. It's bad for the owners. We end it now. You don't slowly stop murdering people. You stop murdering people now. Right? If it's a sin, you stop doing it. You don't do anything gradually. Partially because of, there's no image of this man, but David Walker, this image that I have here is from his book, published in 1829, The Appeal to the Colored Citizens. He was a free black man, grew up in North Carolina, but moved to Boston. And so in many ways, he kind of kicked off and kind of jump-started the abolitionist movement. Because one of his arguments to not just black Americans, but white Americans at the time, was, this is our home. We were born here. The international slave trade had ended decades before. Right? There's no one being brought legally from Africa to the U.S. any longer. The slaves that are there, they've been there, their parents have been there, their grandparents have been there. The United States is their home. Africa is not their home. Walker says, this is our home. We deserve freedom. We deserve liberty. And we deserve to have it here. And he gives a warning. One of the second quote on the sheet is from David Walker, writing in 1829. Remember, Americans, that we must and shall be free and enlightened as you are. Will you wait until we shall, under God, obtain our liberty by the crushing arm of power? Will it not be dreadful for you? I speak, Americans, for your good. We must and shall be free, I say, in spite of you. You may do your best to keep us in wretchedness and misery, to enrich you and your children, but God will deliver us from under you. And woe will be to you if we have to obtain our freedom by fighting. This is 1829. What finally ends slavery in the United States? Fighting. Walker knew, recognized it decades before the Civil War broke out. You can end slavery now, or it'll end with war. Now Walker wasn't alone with those thoughts and feelings, but to publish them and be so vocal about it, right? He's a key figure with all of that. He inspired William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison was from Boston, and so he established a newspaper. That's something else that you do with any of these reforms. You don't just form a group, you start publishing a newsletter. The number of newspapers and magazines and newsletters in the United States, just hundreds of thousands of things being published all the time. As a grad student, that was one of the fun things for me. This is fun. It shows my level of nerdness. There are microfilms at the UT Library just of periodicals from the 1800s. It's like dozens of these. You could just go and scan through, and it's amazing the crazy stuff that you find there. So he starts publishing The Liberator to encourage all Americans, but especially white Americans that don't like slavery, to unite together to end it now. Again, it's Garrison who emphasized, or you don't just like slowly stop sinning. You stop sinning now. So we recognize that this is a sin. He created the first anti-slavery society, the American Anti-Slavery Society, to talk about the immediate end and emancipation of all the slaves. There are dozens of gradual emancipation societies, but this is the first to immediately end it. Women played a key role in the American Anti-Slavery Society, which eventually causes some problems. It's still not, it's not accepted by a lot of people at the time, that women should even be allowed to speak in groups where men are present. This is Sarah and Angelina Grimke, two sisters. I always feel like this photo, there's just something, is it just me, or their heads a little too narrow? Okay, it's not just me. Students freak out with this picture. It's something from social media, historical photos you won't believe. They are from South Carolina, from Charleston. Family, very wealthy. own a lot of slaves. One of the criticisms that supporters of slavery make of Harrison, you're a Yankee. You don't know anything about the institution of slavery. You're talking about stereotypes. You don't actually know how masters treat their slaves. You don't know how benevolent we are and kind we take care of them. We are so much nicer to the slaves than you are to the workers in your factories. You don't know because you're a Yankee. They're from Charleston. Their family owns slaves. They know. So when they visit family in Philadelphia, they visit a local church, which happens to be a Quaker church. They convert to the Quaker faith. Most of the Quakers are dedicated abolitionists. They become speakers, touring the U.S., talking against slavery. So when people might say to people like Garrison, you don't know anything about this. Let me introduce you to my friends who do know. Now, their speaking tours sometimes cause riots. They were talking in one church, and a mob came and assembled and started throwing things through the windows of the church. They barely got out without being beat up. Some of that was because they were abolitionists. Some of that was because they were women. Women shouldn't necessarily be speaking in public places to men, especially in the church. It actually creates a split in the American anti-slavery society because there were so many opposed to the work of women like the Grimke's that they formed their own separate organization where only men were allowed to talk. That's not the case with this guy whose hair I've always been jealous of. This is Frederick Douglass. Douglass was a slave who escaped to the north and gained his freedom and became one of the most well-known abolitionist speakers of his time. He even traveled to England to give abolitionist speeches there. England had already abolished slavery within their colonies decades before the United States did, but there are English societies that are working to try to end slavery in the United States. So he would come over and give talks about the status of abolitionism in the U.S. Well, he was invited once to give a speech for a town's 4th of July celebration. And they gave him the topic, what to the slave is the 4th of July? What does the 4th of July mean to the slaves? That's the passage just above the temperance cartoon. What to the American slaves your 4th of July? I answered, a day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless, your denunciations of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence. Your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery. Your prayers and hymns, your sermons and thanksgivings, with all your religious parade and solemnity, are to him mere bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. Don't hold back. A thin veil to cover up crimes which would disgrace a nation of savages. There is not a nation on the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour. I do not state that's what they expected him to say. I don't know what they expected him to say. I mean, they had to have known who he was to invite him to come. But he did not hold back, right? This is a very powerful abolitionist message, very different. Now, one of the first quotes, I'm not going to read it, but I wanted to give it to you to see an example. There is a vast number of ministers in the North and the South that support the institution of slavery and have a problem with abolition. This I decided not to pick on a larger denomination. Every big denomination that has organization divides over the issue of slavery before the Civil War. Right, so the Methodist Episcopal Church does, becomes North and South. Presbyterian is North and South. Baptist, for reason there is a Southern Baptist Convention, is division before the Civil War of the institution of slavery. All right, but this is a quote from what would become a Disciples of Christ minister. But he's a Northern minister in support of slavery. The Disciples of Christ is what Johnson University Christian Churches, Churches of Christ. So I used the minister for my own tradition to show. His argument is, if you read through it, if you take the Bible seriously, slavery can't be bad. Because slavery is all over the scriptures. So the only way that you can say slavery is bad is if you don't believe the Bible. That is the argument that abolitionists are having to fight against. How do you combat, how do you fight against an institution that seems to even have scriptural support? You have to argue maybe in different ways. Right? Or you focus on certain passages of Scripture. Or you read the Bible differently than maybe how it's traditionally been read. So that's part of it. But the last of the abolitionists that I want to talk about is another one of my favorites. This is Sojourner Truth. That is not her original name. She took that name for herself because of all the traveling and speaking that she did. Right? So I guess if you're going to do a lot of traveling and speaking against slavery, the name Sojourner Truth sounds like the perfect name. She was a slave in New York, so she's a northern slave. She said, and this is one of my favorite quotes from her, "I did not run off, for I thought that wicked. But I walked off, believing that to be okay." She's famous for a speech that she made entitled, "Ain't I a Woman?" Which was part of a bunch of speeches against slavery, and the person who spoke before her was a minister who then, like in the midst of his talk, made some criticisms about women speaking in public. Like, I never do that if someone else gets to come next. Right? Do that maybe only if you're the last speaker of the day. Because she got to respond to him. And she starts off by pointing out some of the racial and also the gender differences. She says, look at my arms. I've been working my whole life. I work out in the fields just as hard as any man. And ain't I a woman? No one tries to open doors for me or put their cloaks down over mud puddles, right? But I'm a woman. And in one of my favorite parts, she says, as a criticism of the minister, I don't know what men have to do with it. Like it was Jesus and his mom Mary. There's no man involved. No man. So like, if it was fine with just Mary and Jesus, why isn't it fine just with her? Can't she also do this? So these speakers, they're very dynamic. They're very engaging. They're also very entertaining. Right? If you go to one of these events, you are going to be entertained. Now, you might get beat up intellectually a little bit, right? Frederick Douglass talking about but you're not going to go away bored. You're going to go away thinking things and feeling things, which is also part of what all of this is about. Okay. So I'm going to skip over that because I want to talk about the Mormons a little bit and utopianism. Joseph Smith Comes from a family of failed treasure hunters. There was belief that there was pirate treasure in the mountains of New York, because of course that's where pirates love to hang out. Way inland, the mountains used a magic seer stone to try and discover the secret caves. You know what a seer stone is? A rock with a hole in it, but a sacred special rock. Family never discovered the treasure. His dad made a living as a well diviner. You have the little Y-shaped stick, and you walk around, and then the stick will point to the ground, and that's where you dig your well. So maybe it's no surprise that an angel suddenly appeared to Joseph Smith named Moroni and revealed to Smith the grand epic history of the Americas. You ever wonder what happened to the other tribes of Israel? We know about like Judah, right? But the northern tribes that get carried away into exile, ever wonder what happened to them? They came on boats to the Americas. So they landed here, and then eventually there was a big war. Half of them had tried to remain faithful to God, and the other half had kind of drifted away into idolatry. And eventually there's a giant war between them, and the good ones are all killed off. And the bad ones, the idolatrous ones, remained. Those are the Indians. Which I guess is why it's okay to kill them then, because they're just idolatrous, bad, ancient Israelites. And just before the last two good ones died, they recorded on sacred golden tablets this epic history. And then they buried them in the mountains of New York. So the angel showed Joseph where these tablets were. He spent a few years using a seer stone to interpret the tablets. That's the Book of Mormon. He collected lots of followers, and as you might guess, that's not a super popular message. We have a second Bible, and here it is. So there's often resistance to them in different places. So they have to move around a lot. And as they move, Joseph gets new additional revelations of things. One of which is that polygamy is okay. And in fact is ordained by God. This is what you do to become perfect. Have multiple wives. That's the one that eventually gets the Mormons into the most trouble. He's actually killed. He's in jail, awaiting prosecution for some acts of vandalism and violence that he did, but a mob breaks in and kills him. And then the Mormons have a decision to make. The majority of them follow the guy on the right, that is Brigham Young, who takes them out to what's going to become Utah. And just, Brigham Young himself had 56 wives. That's a thing, then, until about 1890. In order to become part of the United States, which they really wanted to join the United States, they had to abandon the practice of polygamy. And once they agreed to do that, Utah got to join the Union and become a state. Their goal was to create, though, this perfect utopia, a restored society based upon how God wanted things to be. There's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of calculations, and this is the last guy I'll mention. This is William Miller. He studied the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel and calculated when exactly Christ was going to return.
Yes.
March 21st, 1843. Spoiler. In case you didn't know, Jesus didn't come back. He realized that, rechecked his math found he'd made a slight calculation error, forgot to carry a 1 somewhere, and it's October 22nd, 1844, Jesus was going to return. There was a lot of preparation for that. It was kind of like if someone announced now, October 22nd, 2025, Christ is going to return. If you believed them, there would be some things that you might do differently with your life, right, in these last few months. So that happened then. There were all kinds of people that made lots of changes to their life. They gave up alcohol, they became vegetarians, they did a lot of different things to prepare themselves for it. And on the day, that day, October 27th, they put on white clothes. Thousands of them climbed up in trees, climbed up onto the roofs of their buildings and their barns to be that much closer to Jesus when he came on the clouds. Spoiler alert for him, he didn't. This is known as the Great Disappointment. The Millerites, though, didn't completely disappear. You might think that that would be like if you get the date of Christ's return wrong. They reorganize. One group of them does. They leave aside that bit of trying to predict the end, and they keep some of those living aspects. We know them now as Seventh-day Adventists. So they're still with us. The Mormons are still with us. There's tons of these groups, though. Many of them don't last more than a few years before they fizzle out. Lots of utopian communities. New Harmony, Indiana was one. There's one here in Tennessee called Neshoba, over West Tennessee near Memphis. You can look that one up on Wikipedia. Very, very kind of fascinating. But this was the time to just try and experiment because of how unlegislated the United States was. If you don't have a state church, you're free to kind of create your own thing. You can follow someone else, or you can be the next Joseph Smith. That's a weird way to end it. Do you have any questions? Yes.
Last week you mentioned Pentecostal movements in the U.S. Did that exist in Europe, or did it emerge in the U.S.?
Pentecostalism.
What was the question?
The question was about Pentecostals. If they emerged in Europe or in the U.S. Two of the biggest areas, the United States and India. It comes to Europe later. We're talking about speaking in tongues, healing Pentecostalism. Yeah, it's like the Azusa Street revival in the United States, about 1906, is the first big Pentecostal moment. But a year or two before, among some missionary groups in India, there was similar kinds of breakouts. And so there's some linking up of those groups later. But starts in India and US. Other? Yes? The group near Memphis, Neshoba. N-A-S-H-O-B-A. There's a sketch of it. Yes?
I was wondering how much the lack of clean water impacted the consumption of alcohol.
Yeah, how much does the lack of clean water? Yes, I think that's a big part of it. The fact that, and sometimes the alcohol that you're drinking is watered down alcohol. You mix the alcohol with water because the alcohol kills off germs. So it wouldn't necessarily be straight up alcohol all the time, especially for kids. But my grandmother talked about an Irish bottle. She told me that's how you calm the baby, is you put a little juice in it. That takes care of that. So yes, that is a big part of it. And it's not just like clean drinking water. Sometimes it's just bad tasting water. Right? The water can be perfectly safe to drink and taste terrible. So you gotta put a little cider in there or something. A little wine in there. And then, I mean, there's no other alternatives. There's no soda. So that's it. You've got water, or you've got juices that naturally become alcoholic, so you might as well help them. That was the Puritans, for all of their maybe other kinds of like conservative shortcomings or whatever, like they hated Christmas. They thought Christmas was an abomination, so they're anti-Christmas. But they are pro-alcoholic cider. That was how you knew you had a good wife, is that she knew how to make cider. The Puritan ministers wrote poems about this stuff. My wife is beautiful and has the best cider. All right. Any other questions? Yes, many of them were. Garrison in particular, but also Douglas, Sojourner Truth. One of the most famous, Harriet Tubman, which I didn't mention, she rescued dozens of people herself out of slavery along the railroad. Well, thank you all